Hello there, 8th graders. This is Mrs. Minowitz, and I'm here today to talk to you about rocks. So rocks are mixtures, and they are made of different minerals. So rocks are mixtures of minerals. We're going to now talk about some different words we're going to be using to describe rocks, and we're going to use them mostly when we're talking about and describing igneous rocks. And igneous rocks are rocks that are formed from magma or from lava. So when we talk about those type of rocks, there's two different things that we're going to be discussing. The first one is the texture. And the texture is how a rock feels. Is it smooth, rough and bumpy? When we are describing texture, we will use the words fine-grained and coarse-grained to describe their texture. So these pictures here show you examples of a coarse-grained rock and a fine-grained rock. Coarse-grained rock is rough, bumpy. It does not feel smooth. You can also actually see the different crystals, okay, that it is made out of. If you look, you can see different parts there, different colors. You can tell it's rough and bumpy. That is coarse-grained. On the right, we have obsidian, which is also made from lava. And it is fine-grained. You cannot see the different crystals, and if you were to touch that surface, it would be pretty smooth compared to our granite over here on the left. Another word that we're going to use when we're describing rocks, especially igneous rocks, is composition. And composition is the different minerals that a rock is made of. Okay? So what is that rock made out of? So we're going to again look at granite here, and this diagram here is showing you granite. And you can actually, if you've ever looked at a piece of granite, you can tell that there are different colors in there. Those different colors are different minerals. The darker color in there is mica. The kind of pinkish color in there is feldspar. And the lighter whitish color in there is quartz. So those three minerals make up the vast majority of granite. So together, the composition of granite would be mica, feldspar, and quartz. Another thing we're going to do when we're talking about rocks, and this is when we're specifically talking about igneous rocks, is we're going to be using these words intrusive and extrusive. So intrusive describes rock that forms when magma cools beneath the Earth's surface. Okay? It cools before it gets to the surface of the Earth. When this happens, it creates a coarse-grained rock. There's a lot of time for those larger crystals to form, so that makes it rough and bumpy, and that slow cooling, you would get a coarse-grained rock. So if you see a coarse-grained rock, you would say that it is intrusive. Okay. Extrusive, on the other hand, is rock that forms when magma cools at the Earth's surface. So if you have like a volcano that erupts and that magma or that lava cools and turns into rock, that is going to be an extrusive igneous rock. Extrusive rocks are fine-grained because when that lava reaches the surface of the Earth and cools really quickly, there is not time for those crystals to form, so you get fine-grained rocks that are usually smoother. Okay. So if you take a look at our picture here, we've added on some information. Granite we already know is coarse-grained. It is also intrusive. We can tell that because it's coarse-grained. We know it took a long time for the crystals to form, so it is intrusive because it's got those big crystals. On the other side here, we've got the obsidian. It is fine-grained, and that tells us that it is extrusive. It cooled much more quickly on the surface of the Earth. Right. One of the other things we're also going to talk about is weathering. Now, there are two types of weathering. There's physical-mechanical weathering, which is one type. Both of those words, physical and mechanical, are used to describe the same process. So physical-mechanical weathering is the breakdown of rock into smaller pieces by physical means. So there's no chemical reaction taking place here. We're just breaking a rock into smaller pieces. This can happen when ice thaws, freezes, and that action can actually break apart different rocks. There's wind water, gravity, like having rocks fall. All of those types of things would break a rock into smaller pieces. Here's a picture of showing physical and mechanical weathering. This rock basically over on the right here falling down, and when that's happening, it's breaking apart into smaller pieces. The other type of weathering is chemical weathering. Chemical weathering is the chemical breakdown of rocks into new substances. So you'd have some sort of reaction taking place. We're making a new substance. Think chemical change. Some examples of that would be water, when it's actually having, over time, reacting with that rock. Acid rain, if there's acid in groundwater. All of those types of things would be examples of chemical weathering. So one example is when you have carbon dioxide in the air and it gets with water, we create what's called carbonic acid, and carbonic acid can break down rocks. Okay. This picture here is hoodoos. These are called hoodoos, and it's a type of limestone rock that's shown here, and they're being eroded with carbonic acid that creates all these like rough and bumpy edges here, and these are called hoodoos. The other thing that we need to know about rocks is the rock cycle. Okay. So I want you to fill this in. I'll be filling this in with you. We're just going to start at the top. You could start at any point in the rock cycle, and it doesn't necessarily move in like one continuous path. But at the top here, okay, this type of rock is called igneous rock. Okay. An igneous rock is formed when magma cools. Okay. So magma cools, we create igneous rock. Now when that igneous rock is sitting out there in the environment, there's all sorts of wind and rain and other things that are going to break it down. So our next step in the rock cycle would be weathering and erosion. And when our rock weathers and erodes, it creates little tiny particles, and those particles are called sediment. When that sediment builds up and there's all sorts of pressure on it and some different things get added in here, we actually create sedimentary rock. And that process that creates it is called compaction and cementation. Ooh. Okay, compaction and cementation. It's hard to read that one, but basically it's getting squished together and kind of like glued together. Right? That's sedimentary rock. Now, over time, depending on where the rock is at, it will experience some heat and pressure. And when it experiences that heat and pressure, we create something called metamorphic rock. When that metamorphic rock actually when rock gets dragged down deeper into the mantle of the earth, it will melt. And when it melts, it creates magma, and then this whole cycle begins again. Now, if you notice in the center of your rock cycle diagram, there are some other arrows. Okay? Because we can have some other things that happen that aren't exactly shown on here. So for example, igneous rock here, sometimes we go this way where it gets weathered and eroded and turns into sediment. But you also have igneous rock that could undergo heat and pressure and become metamorphic rock. That's also a possibility. Okay? You could have metamorphic rock that gets weathered and eroded and turns into sediment instead of melting. Okay? So there's lots of different processes that could take place. One thing you need to understand is that one process will always create one thing. So for example, weathering and erosion always creates sediment, but it could be sedimentary rock, igneous rock, or metamorphic rock that is being weathered and eroded. Okay? So we will talk more about rocks in class. Hope you learned something new.